I really should have recognized the signs sooner. That's the kind of thing people tend to say when they look back on the chaos in their lives, right? With hindsight, you can see the cracks forming, those little details that didn't quite make sense at the time, but you brush them aside like they're nothing. I certainly did. I never imagined I would be that guy, the one who gets cheated on by his own damn wife. It all began one ordinary evening. At least, that's what I thought. Rachel was in the shower, and I was just lounging around, scrolling through my phone to catch up on the sports highlights I had missed. Her phone lay on the dresser, buzzing occasionally with incoming notifications. Initially, I didn't give it a second thought. Why would I? We had a solid trust, or so I believed. But then, a message appeared on her screen that made me freeze in my tracks. "Can't wait to see you." Those few words were enough to send my heart plummeting. It wasn't just the message itself, it was the implication behind it. Who was this person she was so eager to meet? My initial curiosity swiftly morphed into suspicion. Before I knew it, my hands were already picking up her phone, my thumb instinctively swiping up on the screen. My mind was shouting at me to stop, but I just couldn't help it. I had to find out. And what I discovered, it left me shattered. Right there, out in the open, was a thread of messages with some guy named Kyle. At first glance, the exchange seemed innocent enough, but as I continued scrolling, it quickly took a more intimate turn. The messages grew increasingly personal, more explicit. And then, boom, a picture popped up. You can guess what it was. It wasn't merely a "can't wait to see you" anymore. It escalated to "can't wait to see you naked, can't wait to touch you again." And that night was so hot. In that moment, it felt as if my entire world collapsed. You know that feeling when your stomach twists into knots and you feel on the verge of throwing up, yet you're completely frozen? That was exactly how I felt, staring at that screen, absorbing the fact that my wife, my Rachel, was sending dirty texts to another man. A stranger, no less. A freaking Kyle. I could barely catch my breath. My heart raced so violently I thought it might burst right out of my chest. I knew I needed evidence, because the second I confronted her, she would likely lie and twist everything around. So I began taking screenshots, my fingers fumbling over her phone as I rushed to capture every sordid detail, every "I miss you" and "I want you." Once I felt I had enough, I quickly transferred Kyle's profile info to my phone. I didn't know what I was going to do with it just yet, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this slide. With adrenaline surging through my veins, I made my way straight to the bathroom. The air was thick with steam, and Rachel was humming to some tune while washing her hair. The sight of her so carefree, so oblivious, only made my blood boil further. How could she act so nonchalantly after shattering our marriage? Without a word, I tossed her phone toward her. It hit the floor with a loud thud, causing her to flinch, her eyes wide in confusion. "What the hell, David?" she yelped, attempting to shield herself with the shower curtain, as if that was the real issue at hand. But I wasn't going to let her play the innocent victim, not this time. "Who the hell is Kyle?" I shouted, my voice echoing off the tiled walls. Panic washed over her face in an instant. You know that look people get when they realize they've been cornered, caught red-handed? Yeah, that's the one. She stammered, trying to feign ignorance, but deep down, she knew she was trapped. What are you talking about?" she stuttered, her eyes darting around like she was searching for an escape route. "Don't lie to me, Rach," I barked, holding up my phone, the damning screenshots displayed right there for her to see. I saw everything. The messages, the pictures, all of it. Her face drained of color as the weight of my knowledge hit her. She began shaking her head as if denial could somehow erase the truth. But then she crumbled, sobbing under the relentless cascade of water, creating a scene straight out of a melodrama. "I'm sorry," she cried out. "I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen," I snapped back. disbelief coating my words. So, what? He accidentally sent you a naked photo? You accidentally spread your legs for him? Don't insult my intelligence, Rach. She attempted to rationalize her actions, to justify what she had done. It was just the way he spoke to me, she said, her tears mingling with the water streaming down her face. He made me feel sexy. When he sent that photo, I couldn't help myself. I felt desired, David. Desired? I nearly screamed, my voice cracking with fury. You're my wife. I wanted you. I've always wanted you. And you threw it all away for some loser who can't even keep it in his pants. I couldn't listen to her excuses any longer. It all felt like nonsense, like she was just trying to shift the blame anywhere but on herself. I couldn't bear to look at her crying, her naked, pathetic self drenched in humiliation. So I walked out. I slammed the door behind me so hard the frame shook, and I just left. Left her there, left the house, left everything. After storming out that night, I had no idea where to go. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house for even another second. The air felt suffocating, heavy with betrayal. I needed to clear my head, but that wasn't going to happen at home, not with her still there. So I found myself at O'Malley's, my go-to bar. You know, the kind of place you retreat to when life feels like a dumpster fire. A dim, wooden dive where the bartender knows your name and leaves you alone if you just want to sit and drink in silence. That's precisely what I needed. As I stumbled into O'Malley's, it felt like just another ordinary night. A local band was belting out covers in the corner, the air was thick with the odor of stale beer, and the regulars were huddled around the pool table, swearing over their missed shots. But none of that registered with me. All I craved was to drown out the chaos swirling in my mind. I ordered the strongest pint they had, some IPA that I usually wouldn't touch, and started gulping it down as if my very life depended on it. Each sip was an attempt to process the whirlwind of events that had just unfolded. How on earth did I find myself in this situation? Had I really been that oblivious? Sure, Rach and I had our ups and downs, but I never envisioned her actually cheating on me. The most frustrating part was that, even though I was consumed by hatred at that moment, a small part of me still wanted to cling to the hope that it was all a huge misunderstanding, a sick prank from which I'd eventually wake. But then the damning screenshots would invade my thoughts again, reigniting the fury within me. I couldn't sit there in my own misery any longer, so I whipped out my phone and shot a text to Dave. You up for a drink? I knew he'd drop everything to be there for me. Dave's the kind of friend who would come running at 2 a.m. if you were having a meltdown. And trust me, I was teetering on the brink of one. 15 minutes later, Dave sauntered in, his leather jacket casually draped over his shoulder as if he owned the joint. The moment he laid eyes on me, he could tell something was seriously wrong. Damn, man, you look like you've been through hell, he remarked as he slid into the booth across from me. Yeah, well, you won't believe the day I've had, I muttered, and before I knew it, the floodgates opened. I showed him Kyle's profile, scrolled through the sordid messages, and unleashed every ounce of fury, betrayal, and confusion that was gnawing at me. It felt like ripping off a Band-Aid, exposing my wound, hoping he would understand just how deep the hurt ran. Dave listened intently, his expression as stoic as ever, his eyes locked on my phone screen like a detective piecing together a case. This guy's a total scumbag, he finally declared, and those words provided a strange sense of relief. It was as if he were voicing everything I needed to hear, validating the seething rage bubbling inside me. You're not seriously thinking of staying with her after this, are you? 'Cause if you are, you've lost your mind. Honestly, man, I don't know. And that was the absolute truth. My thoughts were a chaotic whirlwind. Part of me wanted to walk away and never look back, while another part, the one that recalled our wedding vows, our life together, and the dreams we'd shared, yearned to understand her motivations, to find a way to fix what was broken. It's foolish, I realize, but when you've invested so many years with someone, it's not easy to just walk away. Dave shook his head, his expression growing more serious. Look, I don't know what your next steps are, but that woman cheated on you. End of story. That's not something you can easily forgive. You can't just unring that bell, you know? And don't even entertain the idea of sticking around for some closure. It'll only make you weaker. I downed my beer in one swift motion, the bitterness burning my throat. Yeah, I get it. Deep down, I knew he was right. But knowing something and actually acting on it are two completely different things. The idea of walking away from everything I had built with Rachel felt like tearing away a part of myself. Dave leaned back, tapping his fingers against his drink, then said something that flipped a switch within me. "Let me deal with this guy," he offered, his tone low and almost ominous. "You know I have my methods. I'll dig up everything about this loser and find out who he really is. You want to make him pay? Leave it to me." Now, Dave had built quite the reputation. He was always the one you turned to when you needed dirt on someone. His so-called investigative skills were unparalleled. To be honest, I wanted to know everything about Kyle, where he worked, where he lived, and who else he might have hurt. But more than that, I wanted to ensure this jerk regretted the day he ever crossed paths with my wife. "Yeah, do it," I replied, my voice steady, though my insides were churning. It felt like I was signing up for something monumental, something risky, but I didn't care. I needed to direct this anger somewhere, and if that meant hunting this scumbag down, then so be it. We made plans to meet again in a few days, once Dave had gathered his intel. As I left the bar, I didn't feel better, but I had a sense of purpose, like I finally had a path forward. When I returned home, the lights were still on. Rachel was waiting for me, her face red and swollen from crying. The moment she saw me, she rushed over and threw herself at my feet. "David, please, just hear me out," she sobbed, clutching at my pant leg. "It was a mistake, a stupid, reckless mistake. I swear it meant nothing. Please, let's talk about this, let's fix it." I stood there looking down at her. I used to love those eyes, green, soft, always sparkling when she laughed. Now all I saw was betrayal. She kept begging for my forgiveness, insisting it was a one-time mistake, swearing on everything she held dear that it would never happen again. But I wasn't in the mood to entertain any of it. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Silently, I pushed past her, grabbing a blanket and a pillow from the closet. That couch became my bed for the night, and for the first time in years, we didn't share the same roof, at least not together. I could hear her crying from the bedroom, sobbing as if she were the true victim in all of this. It was pitiful, and for once, I felt indifferent. Let her cry. Let her wallow in the chaos she created. As for me, I lay there on the couch, staring up at the ceiling until dawn, replaying every moment of our marriage, every laugh, every fight, every night we held each other close, wondering if it had all been a lie. The morning after that nightmare was awkward, to put it mildly. I hardly slept on that lumpy couch, and my head throbbed as if I'd just fought a bar brawl, though the real battle was raging inside me. I had no idea how to face the day, let alone Rachel. But, as always, she tried to act like everything could be patched up over a little breakfast and some sweet talk. I lay there, pretending to be asleep when she tiptoed over, balancing a steaming mug of coffee in one hand and wearing that pleading look I used to find charming. "Hey," she whispered, trying to sound soft and affectionate, as if the events of the previous night had simply evaporated. "I made your coffee just the way you like it." She crouched beside the couch, her eyes red and puffy from crying all night. Mine were hardly any better. I sat up, took the coffee, and stared at her. There was something incredibly twisted about the scene, like she thought a cup of coffee could somehow erase the betrayal. "Thanks," I mumbled, the word heavy with the unspoken anger and hurt swirling inside me. "David, please," she implored, her voice trembling. "I know you're in pain, but I meant it when I said I want to make things right. I'll do anything to fix this." She was practically on her knees, reaching out to touch my hand. "Please, give me a chance. I love you. I'm so sorry." And that's when a moment of clarity broke through the fog of my confusion. If she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right, perhaps I could use that to my advantage. I could dangle the possibility of hope in front of her, let her drop her guard while I plotted how to make her pay for her betrayal. One thing was for sure: forgiveness wasn't an option. Not now, not ever. I took a deep breath, forcing my expression to remain neutral. "I don't know, Rach," I replied slowly, pretending to consider my words. "You really hurt me. You do realize that, right? You shattered everything." I know," she rushed to say, nodding vigorously like a child seeking approval. "I hate myself for it. But maybe we can work on things? I swear I'll do whatever you need, anything at all. Just please don't give up on us." I sighed, hoping it sounded sincere, and gave her a long, hard look. "All right," I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll think about it. But don't expect me to forget what you did. It's going to take a lot for me to even consider forgiving you." Her face lit up as if I had handed her a lifeline. She practically launched herself at me, wrapping her arms around me tightly, the familiar scent of her shampoo engulfing me, an all too familiar fragrance that now felt alien. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," she mumbled into my chest, squeezing me like a vice. I had to resist the urge to push her away. Instead, I let her cling to me, letting her believe her pathetic apology held weight, while my mind raced with plans for revenge. Yeah, we'll see," I said, gently pushing her off and standing up. "I've got to get to work." The relief in her eyes was almost comical, like she'd narrowly escaped a bullet. And maybe she had, at least for now. But I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I hurriedly got ready, eager to leave before the pretense of our truce became unbearable. I needed space to think. Rachel lingered in the kitchen, trying to engage me in small talk, asking if I wanted breakfast or if she should pack me a lunch like she used to when we first got married. It was almost pathetic how desperate she was to rewind to the way things used to be. I couldn't stand the sight of her, so I grabbed my keys, muttered a quick, "I'll see you later," and slipped out before she could press any further. All day at work, I struggled to concentrate. The office felt like a cage, my cubicle walls closing in around me as I grappled with my next steps. Hours dragged on, and all I could think about was meeting Dave later that evening. He was the only one who knew the full story, and I needed to hear what he'd discovered about Kyle. I wanted to see that bastard's face, know where he worked, who he was, and how I could make his life a living hell. Finally, evening rolled around and I met Dave at our usual diner, a greasy little hole in the wall with chipped vinyl seats and the best burgers in town. He was already there when I arrived, sipping on a Coke, his expression sharp and focused as if he was preparing for battle. "So?" I asked as I slid into the booth. "What did you find out?" Dave grinned, that sly, satisfied grin he always wore when he was about to drop some juicy intel. "Oh, I found everything," he said, leaning in closer. "Kyle is a real piece of work. He's married with 2 kids, lives in a nice suburban house, and works as a project manager at some mid-level tech firm downtown. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep up appearances." My fist clenched under the table. Married? Kids? The hypocrisy made my stomach churn. This guy was cheating on his wife while messing around with mine, all while playing the role of the devoted family man? It was revolting. "That's not all," Dave continued. "I may have tipped off some of my associates about him. Just enough to pique their interest. They're not the kind to let things slide when a friend's been wronged, if you catch my drift." I nodded slowly, taking in his words. Dave's associates were a rough crowd, people you didn't want to cross. But right now, I didn't care. If they could help me take Kyle down, then I was all in. "So what's the plan?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "We meet up tomorrow," Dave replied, leaning back in his seat and taking a long sip of his drink. "We'll confront him. Make sure he understands he's messed with the wrong people. And if it gets a little physical, well, that's just the price he'll pay for messing with another man's wife." A surge of adrenaline and anger coursed through me at the thought of facing Kyle, imagining the fear that would flash across his face when he realized the gravity of his mistake. This was it. This was how I would start to regain control. "All right," I said firmly. "Let's do it." We spent the next few minutes meticulously mapping out our plan, ensuring every detail was airtight. As I sat there, plotting my next moves with Dave, a sliver of peace washed over me. For the first time since this chaos erupted, I felt like I was finally taking action, not just sitting back and letting life happen to me. And I knew one thing for certain: tomorrow would be a day Kyle would never forget. When I finally returned home, Rachel was waiting for me like an eager puppy, her eyes wide with anticipation. "How was work?" she asked cautiously, as if testing the waters. I shrugged, offering a non-committal "fine," and made a beeline for the couch, signaling that the bed was off limits. That night she didn't press me, didn't cry or plead like she had before. Instead, she retreated to the bedroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a sense that everything was about to shift, and not in a way she would appreciate. The next morning was thick with tension from the moment I opened my eyes. It wasn't just the unease of what lay ahead. It was the acute awareness of every little detail around me, the way Rachel moved about the kitchen quietly, as if afraid to disturb the silence, the way she kept glancing at me like she was trying to decipher my thoughts. She had no idea what was brewing in my mind, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I played my part, keeping my voice steady and my face impassive. Every word felt like it had to be calculated, as if one wrong slip could ruin the entire act. "I'm heading out early today," I said as I grabbed my keys. "Got some things to take care of." "David," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to remind me of the reason we were in this mess. Are you thinking about us?" I paused, inhaling deeply before answering. "Yeah, Rach," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm thinking about it." Her face brightened slightly, as if she took that as a glimmer of hope. Perhaps that was part of the satisfaction I felt, letting her think she was in control while knowing she was actually at my mercy. The hours leading up to my meeting with Dave blurred together. It's funny how time can feel both fast and slow simultaneously. One moment it seemed the clock wouldn't budge. The next I was on my way to meet him, my stomach churning with anticipation. When I pulled up to the diner, I spotted Dave outside, leaning against his car like he had all the time in the world. But I could see the fire in his eyes, the same readiness, the same determination. "You ready?" he asked, tossing me a black mask, its weight feeling ominous in my hand. "Yeah, let's do this," I replied, trying to sound steadier than I actually felt. We drove in silence, both of us aware that this wasn't a moment for jokes or small talk. The route to the parking lot felt like an eternity, every turn intensifying the tension until my hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. This was no longer just about some guy. This was about making a stand and ensuring that what Rachel had done wouldn't just fade away into a distant memory. When we finally arrived, I could see them, Dave's associates, standing in a half circle near the back of the lot. In the center stood Kyle, looking uneasy, as if he sensed something was off but couldn't quite put his finger on it. The air was thick with tension, charged like a storm ready to unleash. We stepped out of the car, pulled on our masks, and approached the group. Kyle's gaze flickered toward me, and I could see the moment realization hit him, his expression shifting from confusion to fear. "Look, man, if this is about something at work," he began, but his voice trembled. "No, Kyle," I interrupted, my tone sharp and unwavering. "This isn't about work. This is about you and about my wife. I'll spare you the details of what unfolded next, but let's just say Kyle got the message loud and clear. He learned precisely who I was, who Rachel was, and what happens when you mess with another man's life. There were words exchanged, promises made, and by the time it was over, Kyle was left with a stark understanding that he'd never view her, or any other man's wife, the same way again. After it was done, I stepped back, trying to catch my breath. The adrenaline, the anger, the raw power of it all. It washed over me like a tidal wave. Dave gave me a nod, the unspoken acknowledgement that it was handled, that we'd done what needed to be done. "Let's go," Dave said, and we walked back to the car, leaving Kyle to contemplate the choices that had led him here. The ride home felt different. There was no turning back from what had just transpired, and I didn't want to. I felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of my rage had been lifted, at least for now. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be about Kyle anymore. No, the next step was Rachel, and that was a whole different game. By the time I got back to the house, night had fallen. Rachel sat on the couch staring at her phone, probably trying to distract herself from the reality of our shattered life. The moment she spotted me, she jumped up, eyes wide with concern. "David, I was so worried. You didn't answer your phone all day," she exclaimed, rushing toward me. Are you okay? Did you think more about—" "Yeah, Rach, I did," I replied, maintaining a carefully blank expression. "But right now, I just need to take a shower and get some sleep, all right?" She bit her lip, nodding eagerly as if clinging to a fragile glimmer of hope. Of course, I'll let you rest." I didn't engage further, merely headed to the bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the hot water cascade over me. It felt like I was washing away every painful moment of the day, every unsettling thought that had plagued me. Standing there under the spray, it struck me. This was far from over. The days following my confrontation with Kyle felt like an agonizing slow burn. At home, I donned my emotional mask, feigning that I was genuinely considering giving Rachel a second chance. She worked hard to embody the perfect wife, cooking meals, tidying up, doing everything to make my life easier. I let her nurse her delusions, allowing her to believe that perhaps we could salvage our relationship. Little did she know, I was already moving forward with my true agenda. It was hard not to notice her desperation. Each morning she'd hand me a steaming cup of coffee with a hopeful smile, and every evening she'd suggest watching TV together, trying to create an illusion of intimacy. I could see the fear in her eyes, the nagging worry that at any moment I might tell her it was over. But I didn't. I needed her to think she was winning me back. After days of letting her plead for my affection, I finally planted the seed that would set my plan into motion. "Maybe we could start anew," I suggested one night, adopting a casual tone as if I were merely pondering the idea. "I don't know, Rach. I'm not making any promises, but maybe." Her reaction was instantaneous. She grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly as if it were a lifeline. Yes, David, please. I'll do anything. I mean it. Just tell me what you want, whatever it takes." "All right," I replied, pretending to contemplate my words. "Let's have a nice evening together, like we used to. Dinner, wine, just being with each other." She practically jumped at the chance, eager to prepare everything. That night, she went all out, cooked a full meal, set the table with candles, and opened a bottle of wine, just like I had suggested. It was almost sad how hard she was trying. I played along, smiling as she poured me another glass, engaging in light conversation and acting like I was reminiscing about our happier times. The wine flowed freely, and our conversation followed suit. We chatted as if nothing had happened, about our favorite vacations, inside jokes, the little moments that had woven our lives together. Rachel's eyes sparkled with hope, and she reached across the table to grasp my hand, squeezing it tightly as she said, "I love you, David. I'm so sorry for everything. I know I messed up, but I promise we can be happy again." I took a deep breath, pretending to be touched by her words. "Yeah, maybe we can," I said softly, knowing that was all she needed to hear. From that point on, I let the evening unfold according to her wishes. She leaned in to kiss me, and I returned the kiss as if I genuinely meant it. We moved upstairs, and things quickly escalated from there. The sex was intense, charged with all the pent-up anger, tension, and the facade of emotions we were feigning. I wasn't thinking about forgiveness. I was plotting my next move. As the heat of the moment built, I knew precisely when to strike. "Hey, Rach," I whispered, keeping my tone light and playful as I held her close. "I want to ask you for a favor." "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft and inviting, eager to comply. "I want you to dance for me," I said, trailing my fingers along her arm. "You know, a sexy dance, and I want to record it, just for us." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. "Dance? David, I don't know. That feels, recording it." "Come on," I encouraged, giving her a reassuring smile. "You said you'd do anything, right? I just want something to remember tonight by. A fresh start, something special for just you and me." For a brief moment I thought she might refuse, but then she nodded slowly. "Okay," she whispered, "if it'll make you happy." I grabbed my phone and hit record, watching as she stood up and began to move, her body swaying to an invisible rhythm. She tried to make it look sensual, putting on a show like she believed it would earn her my forgiveness. I kept my gaze fixed on her, encouraging her with nods and smiles, letting her think she was doing everything right. When the dance concluded, I had precisely what I needed, a video that would be undeniable evidence. The next morning, I rose before dawn. I didn't wake her, didn't utter a word. I simply got dressed, grabbed my phone, and slipped out. Instead of heading to work, I drove straight to a lawyer's office. The meeting was quick, a few signatures, some legal advice, and I walked out with the divorce papers in hand. The final blow was prepared. By the time I returned home, it was well after dark. Rachel was busy in the kitchen preparing breakfast, likely convinced that our intimate evening had salvaged our marriage. The smell of bacon wafted through the air as she turned to me, her face beaming with that eager smile. "Hey, babe," she greeted. "I thought we could have breakfast together. I made your favorite." I walked over to the dining table and dropped the stack of papers in front of her with a thud. "Read these," I said flatly. She glanced at the papers, then back at me, her smile fading into confusion. What is this?" she stammered, picking up the stack and flipping through the pages. Her face turned pale as the reality set in. "David, these are divorce papers." "Yeah," I said flatly, crossing my arms. "I'm done pretending, Rach. Just sign them." Her expression crumpled and she dropped the papers as if they were on fire. "No, David, please," she cried, her voice rising in panic. "You can't do this. We were doing better. Last night." "Last night was a charade," I interjected, my voice icy. "Do you really think one night can make up for everything? You think I can just forget that you cheated, that you deceived me? You brought this on yourself, Rachel, every bit of it." She broke down in front of me, shouting and sobbing, calling me cruel and heartless, saying I was a fool for throwing away our life together. But I'd heard enough. I turned my back on her, walking out, leaving her there with nothing but those papers and the wreckage of our marriage. The next day, I awoke feeling surprisingly calm, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The divorce papers were now in Rachel's possession, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the storm hit. But there was one last piece of my plan that needed to unfold, the part that would ensure Rachel truly understood the repercussions of her actions. After throwing the papers in her face, I had spent the night at Dave's place, needing to put some distance between myself and the chaos I'd left behind. But now, with a clear mind and the final phase before me, I was ready to execute what needed to be done. That morning I scrolled through my contacts, friends we shared, group chats we were both involved in, acquaintances who knew us as a couple but would be blindsided by what was coming. One by one, I sent the video. Rachel's desperate dance, that pathetic attempt to reclaim my love, was now on its way to the very people who would ensure it got the attention it deserved. The subject line? Guess what my wife does when I'm not around? Within hours, the reactions poured in. In this digital age, news spreads like wildfire, and shame travels even faster. Once the video hit the airwaves, it circulated rapidly. My phone buzzed with messages, some from old friends, shocked and appalled by what they had seen, others from acquaintances I barely knew who had already caught wind of the story. I knew it wouldn't take long for the news to find its way back to Rachel. That evening, I returned home for what I hoped would be the final confrontation. The house was a disaster, cushions strewn across the floor, dishes piled high in the sink. Rachel sat on the couch, clutching her phone, her face a tumultuous mix of anger, fear, and devastation. "What have you done?" she screamed as soon as I stepped inside. "You sent that video? You heartless bastard! How could you?" I stood there watching her unravel, knowing she had finally grasped what it felt like to have her world turned upside down. "You did this to yourself, Rach," I said, my voice steady amidst the chaos. "You made your choices. I'm just making sure everyone sees who you really are." In a fit of rage, she lunged at me, her hands trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks as she tried to strike me. "You've ruined my life," she cried, her voice breaking. "I trusted you, and I trusted you," I shot back, catching her wrist and shoving her away. "Now look where we are." She was hysterical, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she would do what I expected, call the police to accuse me of distributing that video. And that's precisely what she did. But I was prepared. Right after sending it out, I ditched my phone, tossed it in a dumpster, and filed a police report claiming it was stolen. I knew the system well enough to safeguard myself. When the authorities eventually came calling, all I needed to do was present my report and let them connect the dots that would lead nowhere. Rachel tried to argue, of course, insisting to the police that I orchestrated everything, that I had intentionally humiliated her. But without the phone, without proof, her claims crumbled. She was left with the cold reality of her actions and the fallout of her betrayal. The social shaming was unrelenting. Mutual friends distanced themselves from her. The gossip spread like wildfire, and her life in our town became intolerable. Eventually, she was forced to sell our house and everything else to scrape together a semblance of a fresh start. She moved away, far from the whispers and judgment, far from the place where everyone knew her story. In a way, that was her true punishment, understanding that wherever she went she would always be haunted by her choices. The divorce was finalized shortly after. She signed the papers, severing the last bond that connected us. As I watched her walk away, I felt nothing but a sense of clarity, a cold, clean break from the woman who had shattered our lives. I won't pretend it was easy to move on. There were nights I lay awake, wondering how we had arrived at this point, how someone I once trusted with my entire being could morph into a stranger. But in the end, I didn't need a therapist. I didn't need someone to help me process my anger or grief. I did what I had to do, and I can live with that. And maybe that's what makes this story different. It's not about forgiveness, finding closure, or learning to let go. It's about confronting what was done to me and handling it in my own way. The world isn't simply black and white, and sometimes revenge is the only course of action that makes sense. I know some will judge my actions. Some will say I crossed a line. But I ask you, what would you have done if you were in my position?